From folklore and fairies
to monsters and mysteries, it came from the Maritimes.
He sees dead people. My co-host, Evan.
Traumatizing me with stories about ghosts, my co-host, Chelsea.
Oh, you better believe it, and here comes another one. Hi, everyone. Welcome to It Came From The Maritimes, an Atlantic Canada folklore podcast. Today, we are revisiting Miramichi, New Brunswick. New Brunswick is known for its lush wooded areas. Densely packed trees can distort sound, but even then, it's hard to explain the ungodly, banshee-like screams heard in the northeast part of New Brunswick. What exactly is creating this terrible sound? Is there a person hiding in the forest, shrieking? Is there some sort of wild animal similar to a jungle cat? Or is there an unseen spirit making these noises? I'll be sharing a folk tale from the region that's been passed down between lumberjacks in New Brunswick throughout the 20th century. This story just might explain the origins of the screaming sounds of the Dungarvon Whooper. Evan, did you appreciate my mild alliteration?
I did, I really did.
Now, have you ever heard of the Dungarvon Whooper?
I haven't, but based on what I'm hearing, it sounds similar to the Heidehinder in some ways.
Very similar qualities. Now, I do want to point out that my New Brunswick correspondents have told me that this is pronounced Hooper, even though it's spelt with a W. But if it turns out I am incorrect, please do not hold it against me. I'm just doing my best in this wild podcasting world. Now, our story starts in the 1850s. Back then, logging camps were plentiful along the Dungarvon River, which flows deep through the forest in Miramichi. Each logging camp had its own designated cook. And at one of these camps, their cook was a young Irish immigrant named Ryan. Now, Ryan was a tall, strong, handsome lad with a head of thick, dark, curly hair. Although his physical attributes were impressive, around the logging camp, he was best known for his booming voice. Ryan would wake up first thing each morning to make the lumberjacks breakfast and prepare their takeaway lunch. Once breakfast was on the table, and after he had stuffed their lunch pails with bread and salt pork, Ryan would let them know that their food was ready with a loud whoop. His distinct holler, unfortunately, wasn't the only thing Ryan was well known for. Ryan wore a money belt around his waist, and it was filled to the brim with his riches. He wasn't shy about sharing the fact that he carried his wealth on him, and he did make some of the other men jealous by bragging about his riches. However, lucky for him, he was such a good cook that none of the lumberjacks were willing to mess with him to steal his wealth. The lumberjacks that he befriended warned him to be more discreet. They were men of honor who wouldn't steal, but they couldn't guarantee that no one else at the camp would respect him in the same way. A short while after Ryan was employed, there was a new boss hired to manage the camp. Now, this man was caught staring at Ryan's money belt with a greedy look in his eye on more than one occasion. There was one cold winter day that the camp boss said he was going to stay back at the camp instead of supervising the lumberjacks at their job site like he normally would. This was unusual. Ryan was always at the camp by himself during the day, preparing the dinner feast while the lumberjacks worked up an appetite. When the men asked the boss why he was staying back, he told them that he was going to take that opportunity to teach the cook how to hunt so he could prepare fresher meals. The other men were skeptical, but who were they to question the man in charge? So what do you think, Evan? Would you be suspicious?
I think that this new manager here might be looking at the money belt a little bit too hard.
That's it. He's up to no good.
I don't trust his story. And everyone knows that when you have salt pork, you don't need anything else.
That's it. Who wants fresh meat when there's salt pork on the table? That alone should have warned them.
Exactly.
Now, later that same day, the lumberjacks returned from a long day of work. They were looking forward to a good, hearty meal, and were disappointed when they weren't greeted by the familiar aromas of Ryan's cooking. They checked the camp kitchen, but they couldn't find him. They divided up and looked around the camp, calling out for Ryan, but getting no answer. They got nervous as time wore on. They were looking forward to hearing that distinctive whoop that he was so known for. After a little while, as they were approaching a barn on the outskirts of the camp, they saw the camp boss emerge, looking guilty. They asked why he hadn't answered them, because he must have heard their yells from across the camp. They wondered if he had any clue where Ryan was. The camp boss mustered up a crocodile tear while he told the others that during the day a bear had attacked Ryan and dragged him away while they were out hunting. He claimed that he had emerged from the barn because he had been looking for a weapon to go out searching for the young cook. Now, that was a little fishy. More than one of the lumberjacks pointed out that the boss would have had his gun on him if he was teaching Ryan how to hunt. But the boss met them with an evil glare and told them if they wanted to keep their jobs, they wouldn't mention it again. The lumberjacks were still concerned, so that night, after the boss went to sleep, they decided to go searching. They did peek around the surrounding forest, but didn't have much luck. So they decided to return to the barn where they had seen the boss emerge earlier. One of the search party found Ryan's corpse tucked sloppily in the back corner of the barn, poorly hidden behind stacks of equipment. So it looks like the boss was up to no good after all.
It really does.
Now, the lumberjacks had been suspicious before, but now they were certain. When they checked Ryan's corpse, they realized that the prominent money belt was missing, and they found evidence that his head had been bashed in. The lumberjacks were upset and wanted to confront the camp boss, but they needed the money and they were too afraid of losing their jobs, so they didn't do that. The lumberjacks decided to bury Ryan's body in a shallow grave in the nearby woods. After that, they just hoped to forget the grisly business. They were in such a rush to bury the cook that, in hindsight, not a single one of them said a kind word or prayer over his hastily dug grave. When they finished burying him and returned to camp, they started hearing an awful moaning sound followed by a desperate howling, all with the distinct tone of Ryan's voice that they had gotten so used to over their time at the camp. They rushed into their bunks, but their nightmares were plagued by the agonized screams of their lost friend. The lumberjacks really ended up not sleeping a wink because of the constant whooping they heard, and they knew that the ghost of Ryan was expressing his rage at his untimely end. The lumberjacks were trapped at the camp for the duration of the winter, and each night they were haunted by Ryan's incessant wails. At the first sign of spring, they fled, telling the camp boss that they refused to return ever again. The owner of the camp was enraged. He couldn't believe his work crew had abandoned their posts. He assumed that they were superstitious, mistaking the sound of wind whistling through the trees for inhuman cries. He went to investigate the campsite himself, but upon his first night there, he heard the same screams. After that, he brought in a Catholic priest, Father Murdoch, who attempted to bless the grave. It did quiet the screaming for some time, but as soon as the new crew showed up, the wails returned. Now, people in the region say that to this very day, if you travel along the Dungarvon River and happen to stumble across the old campsite, you'll hear the eerie moans of the Dungarvon Whooper as soon as night falls. So what do you say, Evan? Want to take a trip there?
Honestly, sure.
See what it's all about.
I want to know what this hooping sounds like. Is it a hoop? Or like, I'm curious.
I'll be honest with you, I was going to consider attempting it myself, but for the benefit of our ears and producer Jeff's ears and the ears of every single person who listens to this podcast, I opted out, but I'd assume a nice whoop, whoop, but louder. You got to put some like heart behind it.
I'd be running. I'd be like, dinner's on.
Well, that's it.
Give me some of that salt pork.
Well, who could resist?
Salt pork. Who can resist?
I'm going to get Evan to taste some salt pork at some point in the near future, and then we'll see if he's as enthusiastic.
All right.
He's ready.
I'm always ready.
The story of this murdered cook is told in the poem The Ballad of the Dungarvon Whooper by Michael Whalen. You can find the full poem online, but I wanted to recite a few of the verses that share just how sinister the tale is. When the crew returned at night, their dear comrades still they mourned, while the shades o'er the night were falling o'er the hill. All that long and fearful night, all the camp was in a fright. Such fearful whoops and yells the forest fill. Pale and ghastly was each face. We shall leave this fearful place, for this camp unto the demons does belong. Ere the dawning of the day, we will hasten far away, from where the dark Dungarvon rolls along. Since that day, so goes the word. Fearful sounds have long been heard. Far round the scene where lies the woodsman's grave, whoops the stoutest hearts to thrill, yells that warmest blood to chill, sends terror to the bravest of the brave. Are you feeling chilled to the bone now, Evan?
I really am.
I would hope so. Well, get ready for even more, because there wasn't just a poem written, there was a song as well. Now, this is what I assume is a fictional tale of a fishing crew who battle the Dungarvon Whooper as they traverse the Dungarvon River. Then again, I have not found anything indicating it's not possibly true, but...
Interesting.
Yeah, so same thing. You can find the full song online. I did share it with Evan earlier. It's a real toe tapper, but I'm going to save you the torment of me attempting to sing. So here are a few of the verses. For when this monster he came forth, the rest did disappear. And believe me, my good people, it did banish all our fear. It left us but the one to fight, and we felt very sure that we could beat any hooper that was on Dungarvon shore. We fought like valiant heroes until the dawn of day, and when he saw that he was beat, he was forced to run away. As he was going to leave us, he gave one long last wail, and I saw him knock down little trees by the wagging of his tail. So I thought this was interesting, and once again, it kind of brings us back to the hide-behinder of Dagger Woods, because I always assumed the Dungarvon Whooper was more of a ghost or a spirit, but this makes it seem almost more like a mysterious creature. So
yeah, some sort of beast.
Yeah, but I guess we'll never know unless we go find it ourselves.
I guess not.
So although Ryan's young life was cut short, his story has been recorded. His harrowing tale exists in poem and song, and there's even been a chainsaw carving of him built in the municipal park in Miramichi River Valley. There was even a train that traveled along the river that was named the Dungarvon Whooper. Is this acknowledgement of Ryan's tragedy enough to silence his screams in the years to come? Only time will tell. So what do you think?
It was quite the story. They don't really mention if anything happens to the boss after that, though, do they?
They don't. I bet he was able to weasel his way out of any guilt.
He does seem like the type.
He does. And he also had Ryan's thick money belt, so he was probably able to pay his way out of anything.
I could see that, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, I do have a bit of a segment planned. And this is something that I had never heard of what I'm going to be talking about until I started researching the Dungarvon Whooper. So back in the day, to pass time around logging camps, tall tales would be told around the campfire. Many lumberjacks would share stories of fantastical beasts lurking in the woods just beyond the light of the fire. This was done to entertain and also to scare their fellow lumberjacks. Since our story today revolved around a logging camp, I wanted to share some info about this tradition. As it goes in folklore, these stories were shared orally between lumberjacks, contributing to the tales spreading far and wide in the logging world. Often, two people would share the storytelling responsibility, each adding details to make the other stories more convincing. So these stories were about fearsome critters, and fearsome critters were essentially these almost comical creatures that were inspired by real animals and used by the lumberjacks to describe different events that could startle an unsuspecting person in the forest. So many of these fearsome creatures have inspired monsters in pulp culture, and some of them have even been mentioned in popular books like Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, so that's for the Harry Potter fans out there. So I've decided to share today a description of a few of the fearsome critters that lumberjacks would blame for the different happenings around the forest in their logging camps.
I will say I believe that my personal favorite, the squonk, might actually be a lumberjack legend.
Really? I never knew that.
Yeah.
And now you'll have a few more to add to the list.
Perfect.
So the first is called a hide-behind. Now, this is a nocturnal creature that was blamed for lumberjacks never returning to camp. It was thought to slink through the forest behind unsuspecting lumberjacks, and it was a creature that would disappear behind a tree if you so much as caught a glimpse of it out of the corner of your eye. Some described it as having the appearance of an upright bear. It apparently feasts on human intestines, but hates the taste of alcohol. So the lumberjacks would always say that having a drink was thought to be a suitable protection method from it. So essentially, the hide behind was used if a lumberjack did disappear because of an animal attack or just because they left the camp. This was what they used to blame it on and how they justified having a stiff drink at the end of the night.
I would to say it reminds me a lot of the hide-behinder, where it's kind of always in the corner of your eye but never really there.
Right, you never quite, maybe that's what the hide-behinder is.
I mean, when you think about it, hide-behinder, hide behind.
It's not that far of a stretch.
Yeah, it's a pretty short chain.
It is. Now the next is a hoolog, which is a moose-like creature with an enlarged lower lip, preventing it from grazing. It also has jointless legs that force it to remain standing at all times, so if it wants to rest, it must lean against a tree. So if you want to catch a hoolog, you need to dig notches into the tree so it gets stuck when it goes to take a nap. So often if there were mysterious footprints or markings against a tree, they would blame it on the hoolog. Now the third is called a tree squeak, and that just names, it sounded too cute to not include. So a tree squeak is a small creature which resembles a weasel with a long tail and even longer legs, which it can wrap around an entire tree, making it blend in seamlessly with nature. Now, on windy days, the tree squeak gets disturbed and lets out a loud yell, and that's why it's the cause of those mysterious sounds heard by lumberjacks in the forest.
I like that one because it's probably that creaking sound you hear when there's really tall trees.
Yes, that like very distinct, like
Yeah, exactly.
that you assume something must be making.
I'm just imagining the legs that go all the way around the tree, and I'm imagining like a weasel with like foot-long legs.
Yes. Now, there are some like artist sketches, so I'm going to try to find them to share to the Instagram because some of these are pretty cute. Some of them are a little creepy, but you know, that's how it goes in folklore. A little cute, a little creepy. We have it all.
Love that.
Now, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of It Came From The Maritimes. You can find us on social media, on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at It Came From The Maritimes, on X at ICFT Maritimes, and if you have any Atlantic Canada folklore you'd like to see covered, or any spooky stories of your own, please email us at itcamefromthemaritimes@gmail.com. If you enjoy our podcast, please leave us a 5-star review. It helps people find us. Now, we like to end each episode by sharing a piece of Nova Scotia folklore advice that we found in our reading. Please do not take this advice seriously. It's just a bit of fun. So, Evan, do you have a folklore fact for us this episode?
I do. Our fact for this week is, when two spokes of a kettle cross, it's the sign ghosts are coming.
I believe it. Thanks so much for listening.
Bye.